Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So, in our recent episode about the niche but important topic of how can a closed source model like Anthropic, and you mentioned that the Claude models were talking about IP that's worth billions of dollars, and I mentioned when I'm using OpenRouter and you peer into the tabs and you look at the inference providers, you see that it's not just Anthropic. You can get inference directly from Anthropic, but you can also get it from AWS Bedrock, or for some other models, you've got a bigger choice. And my question was, if you have a closed source model, how can you have third parties providing it? Not how can they do it or how can they get a license, but how can Anthropic take this ultra valuable IP and say to a data center operator, here's our model, run it, without running the risk that their IP would be stolen or reverse engineered. So that led us to talking about trusted execution environments and how the code is actually secured within those inference providers, which is a really fascinating topic. We talk about computer enclaves and basically, in simple terms, that even those operating the hardware aren't able to access, as you mentioned, even if they have root access to the file system in Linux, they wouldn't be able to access or decrypt the enclave. So that was fascinating. But you mentioned that there's one last vulnerability to consider, even in this world of ultra secure storage, which is, and I'm going to have to check my ChatGPT history to make sure I get the term right, side channel attacks. A side channel attack, in just reading what ChatGPT responded with, is a method of extracting sensitive information from a system by observing indirect signals produced during computation rather than breaking the underlying algorithm itself. Instead of attacking cryptography mathematically, the attacker measures physical or behavioral leaks, quote unquote, that occur while the system operates. I remember reading a while back, Herman and Corn, about some experiment that was done here in Israel regarding exfiltrating data from a air-gapped computer by basically doing this. They were measuring with high sensitivity microphones the actual electrical oscillations and sound being produced by the system in operation, and they were able to exfiltrate some data. And that really blew my mind. We talk about James Bond like stuff, but this is kind of crazy that this stuff is even real. My question, Herman and Corn, I didn't realize, I assumed that this was, again, we talk so often in this podcast about the cat and mouse analogy. Sorry to cat and to mice for wearing this out beyond belief. But whenever we have these things, we have manufacturers trying to stymie that. And I would have thought that this was purely in the realm of academia, but that there was, if it was being released in the public domain, as it was by these researchers, that it was probably already something that had been looked at by the military a number of years ago. So my question, Herman and Corn, is this actually a credible threat vector in the year 2026? Are we seeing data center operators or those who have anything sensitive on computers actually thinking about, what if somebody outside our facility had some kind of crazy listening hardware and they were listening to the fan noises of a computer? Or is this mostly in the realm of theoretical risks at the moment? Herman and Corn, let's talk about side channel attacks in today's episode of My Word Prompts, because we haven't had enough fun already looking at how to secure our computers against ransomware and trusted enclaves. We now have to worry about someone potentially interpreting the physical sounds of our computer. It never ends, but this one should be a particularly good one. Herman and Corn, over to you two.
You know, Herman, I was thinking about the sound our old desktop used to make back in the day. That high-pitched whine whenever it was processing a big file or loading a game. It almost felt like the computer was straining, right? Like you could hear it thinking. I remember sitting there in the dark, waiting for a level to load in mist, and I could actually tell when the CD-ROM drive was about to spin down, just by the change in the electrical hum coming from the speakers.
Oh, I remember that. It was the coil whine from the graphics card and the vibrating capacitors. Most people just found it annoying, but for a certain type of person, that sound is actually a gold mine of information. It is essentially the computer talking in a language it does not even realize it is speaking. It is the physical manifestation of logic. Every time a transistor flips, a tiny amount of energy is dissipated as heat, or it creates a microscopic electromagnetic pulse. When you have billions of those happening in a synchronized dance, the noise becomes a signal.
Well, that is the perfect lead-in for today. Welcome back to my weird prompts, everyone. I am Corn, and I am joined, as always, by my brother, who I am pretty sure can translate capacitor squeals into C++ code. We are coming to you on February 18th, 2026, and the world of hardware is getting weirder by the second.
Herman Poppleberry here, at your service. And while I cannot quite translate it in real time, I have certainly spent enough time reading the research to know that those squeals are far more dangerous than they sound, especially now that we are packing more compute power into a single rack than we used to have in an entire zip code.
We have got a deep one today. Daniel's prompt this time covers side-channel attacks. Specifically, he wants to know if extracting sensitive information by observing physical signals like electrical oscillations or fan noises is a credible threat for data center operators here in 2026, or if it is still just a cool party trick for academic researchers. He is looking at this through the lens of the massive AI clusters we are seeing everywhere now.
It is such a great follow-up to our discussion on trusted execution environments and those secure enclaves. We talked about how companies like Anthropic use things like AWS Bedrock to keep their model weight secret, even from the cloud provider. But Daniel is asking the million-dollar question, what if you do not need to break the digital lock if you can just watch the tumblers move through the keyhole? What if the secure room is leaking light under the door?
Right, and that is what a side-channel attack is at its core, right? It is not attacking the math. You are not trying to find a flaw in the AES 256 encryption or the neural network architecture. You are looking at the implementation of that math in the physical world. It is the difference between trying to solve a puzzle and just looking at the reflection of the pieces in the solver's glasses.
Exactly. Think of it like a safe. A traditional hacker is trying to guess the combination or find a flaw in the lock mechanism. A side-channel attacker is putting a stethoscope to the door and listening for the clicks. Or maybe they are measuring how much heat the safe radiates when you turn the dial. The math might be perfect, but the hardware is a physical object that obeys the laws of physics, and physics is very, very leaky. In 2026, we are dealing with chips that have features measured in angstroms. The smaller and faster we get, the more these physical leaks become pronounced.
Daniel mentioned some of the research coming out of Israel, which we should probably touch on because some of that stuff sounds like it is straight out of a Mission Impossible movie. There is a group at Ben-Gurion University that has spent years finding the weirdest ways to get data out of air-gapped computers.
Oh, Mordecai Gurry's team. They are legendary in this space. They have demonstrated things like FanSmitter, where they control the speed of the cooling fans to create specific acoustic frequencies. Basically, they turn the fan into a speaker that broadcasts data in the form of sound waves that a nearby phone can pick up. They even did Bit Whisper, which uses the thermal sensors and the heat generated by the CPU to communicate between two air-gapped computers sitting next to each other. One computer talks by heating up, and the other listens by measuring its own temperature fluctuations.
And they did one called Air ViBR too, right? Where they used the vibrations of the fans to send data through the table the computer was sitting on. You could have a smartphone on the same desk using its accelerometer to feel the data being sent. It is like digital Morse code to the furniture.
It is brilliant and terrifying. They even did LED at Go, where they used the hard drive activity light to flicker out data at high speeds. But the big question Daniel is asking is, does this matter for a massive data center? I mean, if you are AWS or Google, you have thousands of servers in a room. The noise floor must be astronomical. It is not just one fan, it is 10,000 fans and a cooling system that sounds like a jet engine.
That is what I was thinking. If I'm an attacker, how am I going to hear one specific fan in a sea of 10,000 fans screaming at 60 decibels? It feels like trying to hear a specific person whisper in the middle of a sold-out football stadium. Is that really a threat to a model like Claude or GPT-5?
That is the primary argument for why these specific acoustic or vibrational attacks are often seen as theoretical for the cloud. In a data center, you have massive industrial cooling systems, humongous power supplies, and rows upon rows of identical hardware. The signal-to-noise ratio is incredibly low, plus you have physical security. You cannot just walk into a Tier 4 data center with a parabolic microphone and start recording. The air gap attack scories team does usually assume you have already compromised the machine with malware and just need a way to get the data out.
So, for the physical side, like sound and vibration, you were saying it is mostly a localized threat. Like, if I have a disgruntled employee with access to the rack, or if I'm trying to jump an air gap in a private lab?
Mostly, yes. But here is where it gets interesting for 2026. We are not just talking about fans anymore. As we have moved toward these massive AI clusters, the power consumption is unprecedented. We are seeing racks that pull 100 kilowatts of power. When you are switching that much current at the speeds required for a model like Claude or GPT-5, you create massive electromagnetic signatures, and those signatures can travel.
Okay, so you were talking about Tempest-style attacks. Looking at the electromagnetic radiation coming off the power lines or the processors themselves?
Precisely. And while the noise in a data center is high, the signals we are looking for are very specific. There is a concept called differential power analysis. Even if you cannot see the individual bits, you can see the power spikes when a processor performs a specific operation. If an AI model is processing a specific prompt, the sequence of multiply-accumulate operations creates a power signature. In 2024 and 2025, researchers showed that you could actually distinguish between different layers of a neural network just by looking at the power draw.
But wait, how does an attacker get onto the power rail of a secure server in a cloud data center? That still requires physical access, right? You would have to clip a probe onto the motherboard.
Not necessarily. And this is the aha moment for side channels in the modern era. We have discovered that you can often measure these physical properties through software. This is what we call a software-based side channel.
Wait, how do you measure power consumption through software? I thought that was a hardware thing.
Most modern CPUs and GPUs have power management features that allow the operating system to monitor energy usage. There was a famous attack called Platzes a few years ago. It used the running average power limit interface in Intel processors. This was a feature meant to help developers make their code more energy efficient. But researchers found that the power readings were so precise, down to the microjoule, that you could use them to recover cryptographic keys from inside a trusted execution environment. You do not need a voltmeter if the CPU is literally telling you how much power it is using every millisecond.
So the very tool meant to help you optimize your code becomes a window for an attacker to see what the hardware is doing. That is wild. Does that still work in 2026?
The hardware vendors have tried to patch it by fuzzing. The data basically adding artificial noise to the power readings so they are not precise enough to be used for an attack. But then attackers found Hertzbleed. This one was a real mind blower because it turned a performance feature into a security nightmare.
I remember the name. That had to do with frequency scaling, right? The way the chip speeds up or slows down.
Yes. Most modern chips use dynamic voltage and frequency scaling to save power. When the processor is doing heavy work, it clocks up. When it is idle, it clocks down. The researchers realized that for certain operations, the time it takes for the frequency to change depends on the data being processed. So, by measuring how long a calculation takes, you can infer information about the data, even if you are blocked from seeing the data itself. It turns a power side channel into a timing side channel.
So, even if I'm in a secure enclave where the memory is encrypted and the provider cannot see my code, the fact that the chip is getting slightly warmer or changing its clock speed is visible to other processors on the same machine.
Exactly. This is the noisy neighbor problem on steroids. In a cloud environment, you are often sharing a physical CPU with other users. Even if the hypervisor perfectly isolates your memory, you are still sharing the same silicon. You are sharing the same caches, the same execution units, and the same power delivery system. If I am running a malicious process on the same chip as your secure enclave, I can listen to the heartbeat of your computation by seeing how it affects the resources we both use.
Okay, so let's bring this back to Daniel's question about the credibility of the threat. If I am a data center operator in 2026, am I actually worried about someone extracting Claude's model weights using fan noise?
Fan noise? Probably not. The physical isolation and the ambient noise of the data center make that nearly impossible for a remote attacker. But am I worried about microarchitectural side channels? Absolutely. That is the real battleground. This is where the threat is not just credible, it is active.
Define that for me. What makes it microarchitectural?
It means you are looking at the tiny components inside the chip. The branch predictors, the L1 and L2 caches, the instruction pipelines. We have seen a constant stream of these attacks. Spectre and Meltdown were the big ones that started the craze back in 2018, but it has not stopped. Every year we find a new way that one process can feel what another process is doing by seeing how it affects the shared hardware. In 2024, we had GPU.zip, which showed that data compression in modern GPUs could leak visual information from a browser.
So, if I am running a massive AI model, and I am worried about my intellectual property, the threat is not a guy with a microphone outside the building. The threat is another virtual machine running on the same physical chip that is carefully timing how long it takes to access the cache.
Precisely. And in 2026, the stakes are higher because we are using specialized hardware. We are using massive GPU clusters and TPUs, or tensor processing units. These chips are designed for one thing, massive matrix multiplication. Because they are so specialized, their power and timing signatures are very distinct. If I know you are running a transformer model, I know exactly what the heartbeat of that computation looks like. If I can see even a tiny bit of that signature through a side channel, I might be able to figure out the specific parameters of the model you are running.
This feels like one of those things where the defense is almost harder than the attack. If the leak is a fundamental property of how electricity moves through silicon, how do you even stop that? You cannot just tell the electricity to stop being electrical.
It is incredibly difficult. You have a few options. One is constant time programming. You write your code so that every operation takes exactly the same amount of time regardless of the data. No if-then statements that change the execution path. But that is incredibly slow and hard to do for something as complex as a large language model. Imagine trying to run a trillion parameter model where every single calculation has to wait for the slowest possible outcome just to stay synchronized.
Right. You would basically be throwing away all the optimizations that make modern AI possible. We would be back to the speeds of 2021.
Exactly. The other option is hardware partitioning. This is what we are seeing more of in 2026. Instead of just virtual machines, cloud providers are offering bare metal instances or air-gapped racks where you are the only tenant on that physical hardware. If there are no neighbors on the chip, there is no one to listen to the side channel. This is what the big players like Anthropic are demanding now for their most sensitive training runs.
But that is expensive. The whole point of the cloud is the efficiency of sharing resources. If everyone needs their own physical island of silicon, the costs go through the roof.
That is the trade-off, security versus cost. For someone like Anthropic or OpenAI, paying for physical isolation is a no-brainer to protect their core IP. But for a smaller company using a third-party provider, they might be taking a calculated risk. They are betting that the noise of the data center is enough to hide their signal.
Let's talk about the misconception busting aspect of this. I think a lot of people hear side channel attack, and they think of a hacker in a hoodie with a soldering iron. But what you are describing is much more abstract. It is more like a data scientist with a PhD in statistics.
You are right. The biggest misconception is that side channel attacks require physical proximity. In the early 2000s, that was mostly true. You needed an oscilloscope and a probe on the motherboard. But today, the most dangerous side channels are remote side channels. If I can send a network packet to a server and measure exactly how many microseconds it takes to respond, I am performing a side channel attack.
Wait, really? Just a simple ping or a web request can be a side channel?
Oh, absolutely. There was a classic attack where researchers could figure out the private key of a web server just by measuring the tiny variations in how long it took the server to perform the RSA decryption during the handshake. We are talking about differences of nanoseconds. But if you send enough requests, we are talking millions of requests. The statistical noise clears up and the key emerges. It is like listening to a leaky faucet in a thunderstorm. If you listen long enough, you can figure out the rhythm of the drips.
That is the part that always blows my mind. The statistical part. You do not need to get it right the first time. You just need to observe it 10,000 times and average out the results.
Exactly. It is all about signal processing. And in 2026, attackers have their own AI models to help them analyze the noise. If you have a noisy power signature from a data center, you can train a neural network to filter out the background noise and find the specific patterns of a cryptographic operation. We are using AI to attack the hardware that runs AI. It is a bit of a snake eating its own tail situation.
So, let's look at the downstream implications. If side-channel attacks are a credible threat, does that mean the whole idea of confidential computing in the cloud is a lie? Are these secure enclaves actually secure?
I would not say it is a lie, but it is an arms race. A trusted execution environment like Intel SGX or AMD SEV provides a very high level of protection against traditional attacks. It encrypts the memory so even if the cloud provider's administrator tries to look at it, they see gibberish. That is a massive win. But it does not hide the metabolic rate of the processor. It does not hide the fact that the chip is working hard.
It is like having a soundproof room with a glass window. You cannot hear what the people inside are saying, but you can see them gesturing and moving around. You can see how many people are in the room and how fast they are moving. You can infer a lot from that.
That is a perfect analogy. And for some high-value targets, that inference is enough. If I am a nation-state actor and I want to know if a specific company is training a model on a certain type of data, I might not need the exact weights. I just need to see the shape of the computation to confirm my suspicions. In 2025, there was a paper showing that you could identify which specific fine-tuning dataset was being used just by looking at the memory access patterns of the GPU.
So, for Daniel's question, is this a credible threat for data center operators?
It is credible enough that the major providers are spending billions on it. If you look at the white papers from AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, they are obsessed with side-channel mitigation. They are constantly updating their hypervisors to flush the caches between users. They are disabling features like simultaneous multi-threading, what Intel calls hyperthreading, because it is a notorious source of side-channel leaks.
Wait, they are disabling hyperthreading? That is a huge performance hit. That is like taking a 4-lane highway and closing 2 lanes for security.
It is. For some high-security workloads, they essentially turn off half the logical cores of the processor to prevent one process from spying on its twin on the same physical core. That tells you exactly how seriously they take this. They are willing to sacrifice 30% of their compute power just to close a side channel. You do not make that kind of sacrifice for a theoretical risk.
That is a great data point. You do not sacrifice 30% of your product's performance for a theoretical risk. You do it because you know the risk is real and your customers are demanding protection.
Exactly. Now, for the average developer building a CRUD app or a simple website, side-channel attacks are probably not on their threat model. The effort required to pull off an attack is too high for the reward. But if you are handling billions of dollars in crypto assets, or if you are hosting the crown jewels of a trillion-dollar AI company, side channels are at the very top of your list.
It feels like we're moving toward a world where hardware diversity becomes a security feature. If every server in a data center is identical, the side-channel signature is the same everywhere. But if you have a mix of different architectures, it becomes much harder for an attacker to build a reliable model of the leakage.
That is an interesting thought. Although, from an operational standpoint, data center managers hate diversity. They want everything to be homogeneous, so it is easier to manage and replace. But you are right, predictability is the enemy of security. If I know exactly what an H200 GPU looks like when it is doing a matrix multiply, I can attack any H200 in the world.
Let's do a quick thought experiment. Imagine it is 5 years from now, 2031. We have quantum side channels. Is that a thing?
Oh, do not even get me started. Quantum computers have their own set of physical leakages. In fact, some of the most successful attacks on early quantum prototypes have been side-channel attacks, measuring the magnetic fields or the temperatures required to keep the qubits stable. But let's stay in 2026 for now. The hot topic right now is optical side channels.
Optical? Like looking at the blinking lights.
Not just the lights. There was a paper recently where researchers used a high-speed camera to watch the power LED on a set of speakers. They found that the minute fluctuations in the brightness of the LED were correlated with the sound being played by the speakers. They could actually reconstruct the audio from a video of the LED.
No way. That is insane. You could hear a room just by looking at a light through a window.
Exactly. Now, apply that to a data center. Most servers have a status or activity LED. If you have a camera in the room, maybe a security camera that has been compromised, you could potentially use the flickering of those LEDs to exfiltrate data. Even the liquid cooling systems we are seeing in 2026 could be a side channel. The flow rate of the coolant or the vibration of the pumps changes based on the thermal load of the CPU. If you can measure the pulse of the cooling system, you can measure the pulse of the data.
It really makes you realize that information theory is not just about bits and bytes. It is about the flow of energy. Anytime energy is transformed, information is leaked. It is a law of the universe.
That is deep, Corn. And it is fundamentally true. The second law of thermodynamics basically says you cannot do anything without creating waste in the form of heat or disorder. And that waste always carries a memory of the process that created it. Side-channel attacks are just the art of reading that memory.
So, what are the practical takeaways for our listeners? If I am a CTO or a lead architect, and I'm listening to this, should I be panicking?
No panic necessary, but you should be side-channel aware. First, if you are using the cloud, understand what isolation guarantees your provider is actually giving you. Are you on a shared instance? Are you in a TEE? If so, what is their policy on flushing caches or disabling hyperthreading? If you are on a multi-tenant GPU, you are much more vulnerable than if you are on a dedicated instance.
Second, if you are writing cryptographic code or handling extremely sensitive data, do not try to roll your own. Use well-vetted libraries that are specifically designed to be constant time. The people who write those libraries are specialists who spend their lives thinking about these nanosecond leaks.
And third, think about physical security, even for your digital assets. If you are running your own hardware, the layout of your racks, the shielding of your cables, and even the acoustic treatment of your server room can make a difference. In 2026, we are seeing some high-security facilities actually using white noise generators inside the server racks to mask the acoustic and electromagnetic signatures.
I also think there is a takeaway for AI developers. If you are deploying a model into a trusted environment, remember that the trust is not absolute. If your model is a black box that people can query, they might be able to use inference side channels, just looking at the time it takes for the model to respond to different prompts to figure out how it is built.
Oh, that is a great point. Timing attacks on AI inference are a huge area of research right now. If a certain type of prompt triggers a specific branch in your neural network that takes longer to compute, I can use that to map out the structure of your model. It is like playing 20 questions with the hardware.
So rate limiting and adding a bit of jitter to your response times might actually be a security feature, not just a way to manage traffic. You are intentionally making the window blurry so the attacker cannot see the tumblers moving.
Exactly. By intentionally making your system a little bit noisier and less predictable, you make it much harder for an attacker to find the signal. It is the security through chaos approach.
Well, Herman, I think we have thoroughly explored the leaky world of side channels. It is fascinating to think that even in this ultra-digital age, the physical world still has a way of poking its head in. We try so hard to live in the world of pure logic, but we are still tethered to the world of copper and silicon.
It always does. We are biological machines living in a physical universe. No matter how much we try to abstract things into ones and zeros, the hardware always matters. Physics is the ultimate root of trust, but it is also the ultimate leak.
Definitely. And hey, if you have been enjoying our deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of tech, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show reach new people who might be interested in hearing about capacitor squeals and flickering LEDs. We are trying to grow the community of weird prompt enthusiasts.
Yeah, it genuinely makes a difference. We love seeing those reviews come in. It is the only side channel we have to know if you guys are actually enjoying the show.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com, where we have our full archive of episodes. We are up to 669 now, which is just wild. There is an RSS feed there if you want to subscribe, and a contact form if you want to send us your own thoughts on the show. We have got transcripts for everything too, if you want to read along.
And you can always reach us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com. We would love to hear if any of you have ever actually heard a side channel in the wild, or if you have a prompt that is even weirder than this one.
Thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It really opened up a rabbit hole we did not expect to go down today. This has been My Weird Prompts.
See you next time. Keep your fans quiet and your caches flushed.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.